The gown was already gone when Maren Hale came home from the milliner's shop, where she worked 6 days a week hemming bonnets for women who had never hemmed anything in their lives. The wardrobe door hung open. The lavender silk, the only thing left from before the fall, was missing, and in its place lay 3-pound notes and a scrawled receipt from a second-hand dealer on Monmouth Street. Her mother sat at the kitchen table turning a teacup in her fingers as though it were a rosary. "It was gathering moths," Dorothea Hale said. Maren set down her parcels. The receipt was still damp from the rain her mother had walked through. 3 pounds. The gown had been worth 40 when her father commissioned it from a French dressmaker in Mayfair. Back when they lived in a house with a name instead of a number. 3 pounds for the last beautiful thing Maren owned, sold 2 days before Lady Ashworth's charity ball. The one event each year where the milliner's girls were permitted entry, the one night Maren might be seen as something other than a pair of hands behind a counter. "You knew," Maren said. She did not raise her voice. She had learned in the 3 years since her father's business partner absconded with everything, and her father followed him into a grave 6 months later. That volume accomplished nothing. Precision accomplished more. "You knew the ball was Saturday. You knew I had been altering the bodice for 3 weeks. You sold it while I was at work because you did not want the argument." Dorothea's mouth thinned. "We needed coal. We needed coal last month when I gave you my wages for it. Where did that go?" Maren picked up the receipt, folded it once, a sharp, deliberate crease, and placed it in her apron pocket. She had a habit of folding things precisely when her hands wanted to shake. Paper, fabric, napkins, the edges of her own composure. "You gave it to Aunt Phoebe again?" Her mother said nothing, which was confirmation enough. Phoebe Cranston, Dorothea's sister, consumed money the way a stove consumed air. Invisibly, constantly, and with the absolute conviction that the world owed her warmth. "I will go in my work dress," Maren said, "and I will smile. And no one at Lady Ashworth's ball will know the difference, because no one there looks at me long enough to notice." She moved to the stove, struck the match, and set the kettle on. The scrape of the match was louder than her anger. But Dorothea was wrong about one thing. Someone had looked at Maren long enough to notice. Once, 5 years ago, at the last ball she attended, while her father was still alive, and their name still meant something. A man with gray eyes and a face like winter had asked her to dance. He had been cold to the touch. She had mentioned she liked the smell of rain on stone, and he had said, "So do I. It is one of the few smells that does not change across centuries." She had laughed, thinking it a strange joke. He had not corrected her. He had watched her for the rest of the evening from the edge of the room, and then he was gone. She never learned his name, and the world fell apart 3 months later. She had not thought of him in years. She was thinking of him now because the gown she would have worn Saturday was the gown she had worn that night. Maren folded the second crease into the receipt and put the kettle's whistle to use. Lady Ashworth's charity ball existed to make wealthy people feel generous and poor people feel grateful, and it accomplished both with admirable efficiency. The ballroom at Ashworth House blazed with gaslight and beeswax candles. Maren stood near the servants' entrance in her gray work dress, her hair pinned with the one tortoiseshell comb she had hidden from her mother. Watched the silk and satin parade past her like a river she had once swum in and now observed from the bank. Bessie Flint, the milliner's forewoman and the closest thing Maren had to a friend, materialized beside her with 2 glasses of lemonade. Bessie was 53, built like a wardrobe, and possessed of the kind of honesty that most people found refreshing for exactly one conversation before they started avoiding her. "You look like a governess at a funeral," Bessie said, handing her a glass. "Thank you, Bessie. That is precisely the confidence I needed." "I am not here to give you confidence. I am here to drink free lemonade and watch rich people pretend they care about the poor." Bessie surveyed the room with the expression of a woman cataloging sins. "Lady Ashworth is wearing last season's Worth gown. Someone's had a bad quarter at the bank." She glanced sideways at Maren. "Your mother sold the lavender, didn't she?" Maren folded the edge of her cup, one crease. "Yes. That woman would sell your teeth if she could find a buyer." Bessie took a long drink. "Well, you're here, that's what matters. And you still carry yourself like someone who belongs, which is more than half the room can say." The front doors of the ballroom opened, not in the usual way, not pushed by footmen with practiced ease, but pulled as though the night outside required more space to accommodate what was entering. The draft carried the smell of wet stone and something older, something that made the candle flames lean and then straighten. He came in alone, no entourage, no announcement. He wore black, tailored with the severity of someone who had long since stopped caring about fashion and arrived at elegance by accident. His hair was dark, threaded with silver at the temples. Not gray from age, but silver like metal, catching light in ways that made Marin's breath still in her chest. His face had not changed. 5 years, and the sharp planes, the mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile and was only now remembering. The gray eyes that swept the room with the patience of someone who had seen 1,000 rooms and found them all wanting. None of it had changed, not aged by a single day. Marin noticed this. She folded it into the same mental pocket where she kept the receipt in the memory of his hands like wet stone, and she said nothing. The room noticed him too. Conversations fractured. Lady Ashworth herself crossed the floor with the urgency of a woman who has just remembered an important social debt. "Lord Thorne," she said loud enough to carry, "what an extraordinary honor. We had no idea you were in London." "I was not," he said. His voice carried the quality of a cello, low, resonant, with an undertone that made the air feel thicker. "Until this evening." His gaze moved across the room unhurried, cataloging and dismissing with equal efficiency. It reached the corner where Marin stood and stopped. She felt it like a hand pressing against her sternum. Not painful, inevitable. He crossed the ballroom. The crowd parted, not dramatically, not like the Red Sea, but in the subtle, instinctive way people move when they sense something passing that they do not fully understand. Lady Ashworth's mouth opened and closed. A woman in green silk clutched her companion's arm. Bessie set down her lemonade. He stopped in front of Marin, close enough that she could feel the cold air that surrounded him like a second coat, could smell rain on stone. The smell she had once told a stranger she loved. "Miss Hale," he said. The room went very quiet. "You know my name," Marin said. She folded the edge of her cuff a third time, a sharp crease. "I never knew yours." "Thorne," he said, "I should have told you that night. I have regretted the omission for 5 years." He held something in his left hand, a garment bag, dark and unassuming. He lifted it slightly. "I understand you are in need of a gown." She stared at him. The ballroom stared at both of them. Bessie, beside her, made a sound that was either a cough or a suppressed hallelujah. "How could you possibly know that?" Marin said. "I know a great many things about you, Miss Hale," Lord Thorne said. "Most of them I learned because I could not stop myself from asking. This particular detail I learned from a second-hand dealer on Monmouth Street who sold me a lavender gown this afternoon for considerably more than he paid for it." He offered the bag. "I have brought both the original and an alternative, in case you preferred something new. The choice is yours." Inside the bag, a bag, she found the lavender silk, clean, pressed, restored, and beside it a gown of deep midnight blue that felt like water against her fingertips. She looked up at him and saw nothing predatory in his expression, only the careful stillness of a man who was terrified she might say no. "The blue," she said. "The lavender has too many memories." "Good ones?" "The best one is standing in front of me, and he owes me a very long explanation." Bessie picked up her lemonade again. "I like her," she said to no one in particular. "I have always liked her." The blue gown fit as though it had been made for her, which, as she later discovered, it had. Commissioned 3 years ago when Lord Thorne first learned of her father's death and her family's collapse. Held in readiness for a moment he was not sure would come. This fact made Marin's hands shake when she heard it, so she folded the sash of the gown twice and breathed. They danced. His hand at her waist was cool through the silk, and she was acutely aware that his chest, pressed close during the waltz, did not rise and fall with breath. She noticed. She counted. 1 full minute of contact, no respiration. She filed it away. "You disappeared," she said as they turned past the orchestra. 5 years ago, after the dance, I looked for you." "I know," he said. "I had to leave. There were reasons I could not explain then." "Can you explain them now?" "Some of them, not all, not yet." She looked at him directly. "I don't accept vague answers, Lord Thorne. I spent 3 years accepting my mother's vague answers about where the money went, and it cost me a lavender gown and most of my patience. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, and beneath it, a warmth that softened the sharp architecture of his face. "You have changed," he said. "I have been compressed," she said. "There is a difference." The music ended. He led her to the edge of the floor, and she felt every pair of eyes in the room tracking them like compass needles swinging north. Then Phoebe Cranston arrived. Marin's aunt swept through the ballroom doors in a burgundy gown that was, Marin noted with cold precision, far too expensive for a woman who supposedly could not pay her own rent. Phoebe had the look of a woman who had expected to find someone and had found her. Her eyes locked onto Marin in the blue dress, standing beside Lord Thorne, and her expression curdled like milk left in the sun. "Marin, darling," and Phoebe said, approaching with the kind of smile that is technically a baring of teeth. "What a surprise! I did not think you would attend. Your mother mentioned you had nothing suitable to wear." "My mother was mistaken," Marin said, "as she sometimes is about where the coal money goes." Phoebe's smile did not waver. Her eyes moved to Lord Thorne and stayed there with the calculating fixity of a woman appraising livestock. "Lord Thorne, what a pleasure. I did not realize you were acquainted with my niece." "We danced 5 years ago," Lord Thorne said. "I have been thinking about it since." "How romantic." Phoebe's voice carried the temperature of January. "Though I should mention, if you are considering any association with my niece, you should know the full circumstances of her father's ruin. There are details the family prefers not to discuss publicly." The threat pressed into the wallpaper like smoke. Marin felt it settle against her skin, the old, familiar weight of Phoebe's particular talent for making the truth sound like a weapon. "I am aware of Mr. Hale's circumstances," Lord Thorne said. His voice had not changed in volume, but the candles nearest to them flickered as though touched by a wind that existed nowhere else in the room. Phoebe held his gaze for a moment, then smiled wider. "Of course, I merely want what is best for the family." She touched Marin's arm as she passed, a light proprietary touch that said, "I am not finished." "That woman," Bessie said from behind a potted fern where she had been strategically positioned, "has the moral compass of a weather vane." 3 days after the ball, Marin sat in Lord Thorne's library. She was still not entirely sure how that had happened, only that he had offered her the use of his collection when she mentioned missing her father's books, and she had accepted because the alternative was spending Sunday in the flat listening to her mother justify Phoebe's behavior. The library smelled of old leather and beeswax and something faintly metallic she could not identify. Lord Thorne sat across from her, reading correspondence with the unhurried attention of someone who had all the time in the world, which Marin was beginning to suspect he might. "Your hands are never warm," she said, not looking up from her book. He set down his letter. "No. And you do not eat. I have been here 4 hours, and you have not touched the tray Mrs. Calloway brought." "I was not hungry." "You are never hungry. You have not eaten in any of the 3 times I have seen you since Saturday." She turned a page with deliberate calm. "I am direct, Lord Thorne. I told you this. I notice things, and I do not pretend otherwise." He was quiet for a long time. The fire cracked. Outside, rain began. Soft, persistent, the kind that accumulates rather than falls. "When you are ready to hear the answer," he said, "I will give it." "I am ready now." "No," he said gently. "You are ready to ask. That is not the same thing." He looked at her then, and the gray of his eyes seemed deeper than any color should be, as though something very old and very tired lived behind them. "There are things about me that will change what you are willing to accept. I would like a few more days of your company before I risk that." Marin folded the corner of her page. One crease. "You may have until Wednesday," she said. "After that, I will form my own conclusions, and I warn you, I am rarely wrong." He almost smiled. "I know." That evening, Mrs. Calloway, Lord Thorne's housekeeper, a woman of 60 who moved through the house with the authority of a field marshal and the discretion of a priest, walked Marin to the carriage. She had known Lord Thorne, she said, for 31 years. "He has not invited anyone into that library in 2 decades," Mrs. Calloway said, tucking a blanket around Marin's knees as though Marin were her own personal responsibility. The last person who sat in that chair was a scholar from Edinburgh who bored him so thoroughly he fell asleep with his eyes open. She paused. His lordship, I mean, not the scholar. Marin laughed. The startled kind, the kind that escapes before permission is granted. He looks at you, Mrs. Calloway said, as though you are the answer to a question he has been asking for a very long time. I thought you should know that, in case you were wondering. On Tuesday, Phoebe struck. The letter arrived at the milliner's shop in a cream envelope addressed to Marin's employer, Mrs. Hathaway, and it contained a detailed account of Arthur Hale's ruin, embellished, poison, and carefully structured to imply that Marin had known about her father's partner's fraud before it happened, that she had been complicit, that employing her was a risk to the shop's reputation. Mrs. Hathaway, who was not unkind but who depended absolutely on the goodwill of wealthy clients, called Marin into the back room and showed her the letter with the expression of someone handling a live coal. I do not believe it, Mrs. Hathaway said, but if Lady Cranston is saying this in drawing rooms, she is not Lady Cranston, Marin said, her voice steady while her stomach dropped. She is Mrs. Phoebe Cranston, wife of a clerk, and she has been living beyond her means on money she extracted from my mother. This letter is her insurance. She wants to make sure I never rise high enough to expose that. Mrs. Hathaway looked at the letter, then at Marin. Can you prove that? Give me a week. She left the shop at noon with her position intact but fragile, and found Lord Thorne's carriage waiting on the street. He was inside. He had, she would later learn, been on his way to call on her when he heard her heartbeat accelerate from 2 streets away, heard the particular tight rhythm of someone controlling panic through willpower alone. Something has happened, he said as she climbed in. Not a question, she told him. She did not soften it, did not arrange it for sympathy. She laid out the facts the way she folded fabric. Clean lines, precise edges, nothing wasted. I can end this tonight, he said. The carriage interior felt colder. His eyes had changed. The gray darker, the pupils too wide for the available light. Your aunt will never trouble you again. No, Marin said. Marin going. No, I sacrificed my inheritance, my father's good name, and 3 years of my life to protect my mother from the consequences of trusting Phoebe. If you end it for me, that sacrifice means nothing. I spent what I had. I chose that. What I will not choose is someone else finishing what I started. He looked at her for a long time. The carriage rocked over cobblestones. Outside, London moved and breathed and did not care about either of them. Then tell me how to help, he said. Not instead of you, beside you. She folded her gloves in her lap. 1 crease, 2, 3. I need the financial records Phoebe has been hiding. The money she took from my mother. There will be a trail. Receipts, debts, property she purchased with funds she claims she never had. If I can show Mrs. Hathaway and anyone else who received that letter that Phoebe is the fraud, not me, the accusation collapses. I can find those records, Ramon said. I have resources that do not require explanation. She studied him, the too still quality of his face, the hands that rested on his knees without the slightest tremor, the chest that did not move. Wednesday, she said. You promised me an explanation by Wednesday. I did. Is your explanation going to change whether I can trust you? That, he said quietly, depends on how you feel about things that are very old and very strange and very much in love with you. She did not look away. Wednesday, she repeated. Wednesday came, and with it, Phoebe's second strike. A notice appeared in 3 society columns suggesting that Marin Hale, identified only as the daughter of the disgraced textile merchant, had been seen entering Lord Thorne's townhouse, unchaperoned, on multiple occasions. The implication was clear. The damage was immediate. Marin arrived at the shop to find Mrs. Hathaway pale-faced and 2 clients already gone. I cannot weather this, Mrs. Hathaway said. I am sorry, Marin. I truly am. 1 more day, Marin said. Give me 1 more day, and I will bring you proof that the woman behind these accusations is a thief who has been stealing from her own family. She walked to Lord Thorne's house in the rain, her coat soaked through by the time she reached the door. Mrs. Calloway took 1 look at her face and put the kettle on without being asked. Lord Thorne was in the library. He stood when she entered, and his expression, The careful control, cracking into something raw and urgent, told her he already knew. I read the column, Mom, he said. I am sorry. My association with you has given her ammunition. Your association with me, Marin said, pulling the wet coat from her shoulders, is the only thing currently keeping me from losing everything a second time. Do not apologize for it. She sat in her chair, she realized, because he had never moved it after her first visit. You owe me an explanation, and I need those records. Both. Now. He knelt in front of her, not dramatically, practically, so their eyes were level. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the cold radiating from his skin. I am a vampire, he said. I have lived for 411 years. I do not breathe because I do not need to. I do not eat because food is not what sustains me. I heard your heartbeat from 2 streets away on Tuesday day because my senses are not human. The gown I commissioned for you 3 years ago exists because I have watched over you since the night we danced. I could not intervene in your suffering because you had not invited me to, and I would not take that choice from you. Logs shifted in the grate. The rain hammered. Marin looked at him, really looked, and every anomaly she had catalogued and folded away unfolded at once. The hands like wet stone, the absent breath, the silver in his hair that was not age, the way he moved through rooms as though the air itself made space for him, the smell of rain on stone that clung to him because he had stood in centuries of it. Vampire, she said. Yes. She reached out and pressed 2 fingers against his wrist. No pulse. She counted to 10 anyway in habit, and then withdrew her hand. All right, she said. Now show me Phoebe's records. Something broke open in his face. Relief so profound it looked like pain. He had expected her to run. She had expected herself to be afraid. Neither thing happened. He had the records, his resources, ancient, thorough, and apparently including a solicitor who had been managing supernatural affairs since the reign of George III, had produced a complete accounting of Phoebe Cranston's finances. The money Dorothea had given her sister over 3 years totaled nearly £800. Phoebe had used it to lease a house in Chelsea, purchase a wardrobe, and fund the lifestyle she presented to society as independent means. She has been wearing my father's ruin like a costume, Marin said, staring at the ledger. Yes. Marin's plan was precise. Confront Phoebe at Lady Ashworth's Thursday salon, a weekly gathering where gossip was currency and witnesses were plentiful. Present the financial records. Let the truth do what truth does to people who have built their lives on lies. But Thursday morning, the plan fractured. Dorothea Hale appeared at Lord Thorne's doorstep, weeping, with a letter from Phoebe threatening to have Marin committed to an asylum for hysterical delusions and public indecency if the accusations against her did not stop. Phoebe had, it seemed, a sympathetic physician and a willingness to weaponize the system against her own niece. She cannot do that, Marin said, but her voice was thin. She can try, Lord Thorne said. The air around him had gone very cold, and the attempt alone would destroy your reputation beyond recovery. An asylum accusation, even unfounded, follows a woman forever. Marin sat at the library table, the ledger open before her, and pressed her palms flat against the wood. She counted the grain lines, 7, 8, 9, and breathed. And I cannot confront her publicly, she said. Not alone, not as a niece accusing an aunt. The physician gives her institutional cover. Bessie Flint arrived at 10:30, having been summoned by Mrs. Calloway through channels Marin did not ask about. She took one look at the ledger, one look at the asylum letter, and sat down with the expression of a woman rolling up her sleeves. I know that physician, Bessie said. Dr. Renfrew. He fitted my cousin for spectacles and charged her double because she argued with him. The man is a bully, not a doctor, and his medical certification has been under question for 2 years. I heard it from his own clerk's wife at market. Marin looked at her. Can you prove that? I can bring his clerk's wife to the salon. She's been waiting for someone to ask. The plan adapted, not a direct confrontation, a dismantling. Marin would present the financial records while Bessie's witness undermined the asylum threat. And Lord Thorne would be there, not to act, but to stand beside her. His presence, his title, His visible support would make it impossible for society to dismiss Marin as hysterical. "You are asking me to do nothing," he said. "I am asking you to do the hardest thing you have ever done," Marin said. "Stand there and let me fight." His mouth became a seam. 400 years of instinct screamed against it. But he looked at her. This woman who had given up an inheritance to shield a mother who did not deserve shielding, who had rebuilt herself from the ground up, who folded paper when her hands shook because she would not give the world the satisfaction of seeing her tremble. And he nodded. "Beside you," he said, "not in front." Lady Ashworth's Thursday salon was smaller than the ball. 30 guests, intimate, the kind of gathering where a single revelation could travel through all of London by Friday morning. Phoebe was already there when Marin arrived in the blue gown, Lord Thorne at her side. Bessie 2 steps behind with a woman in a plain brown dress who kept her hands folded and her eyes sharp. Phoebe saw them and went still. Then she smiled, that bright, terrible smile. "Marin, darling, I did not expect to see you here. I thought you might be feeling unwell." The emphasis on the last 2 words was surgical. "I feel extraordinarily well," Marin said. "Better than I have in 3 years, in fact, because I finally have something I have been lacking." She opened the leather folio she carried and set it on the tea table between them. "The truth." The room quieted. Lady Ashworth leaned forward. "These are your financial records, Aunt Phoebe. £812 received from my mother over 36 months. Recorded as gifts but extracted through systematic manipulation of a grieving woman. This money funded a lease in Chelsea, a wardrobe from 3 different dressmakers, and a lifestyle you presented to society as your own independent means." Marin turned a page. "You sold my gown, the last possession I valued, through my mother because you needed the £3 to cover a milliner's bill you had put on credit. Your milliner's bill, not ours." Phoebe's smile had not fallen, but it had frozen. "These are fabrications. You are unwell, Marin. I have spoken to Dr. Renfrew." "Dr. Renfrew," Bessie said, stepping forward, "whose medical certification has been under formal review by the College of Physicians since last March. This is Mrs. Agnes Tully, clerk's wife to Dr. Renfrew's own practice, who will confirm that the doctor has not held a valid right to commit any patient for the past 9 months." Mrs. Tully nodded once firmly. The room shifted. Marin watched it happen, the recalculation in every pair of eyes, the quiet realignment of sympathies. Phoebe looked at Lord Thorne as though expecting him to reveal himself as the architect of this humiliation. He said nothing. He stood beside Marin with his hands behind his back and his face perfectly, deliberately neutral. He was a wall, not a weapon. Marin closed the folio. "I am not unwell, Aunt Phoebe. I am not hysterical. I am not complicit in my father's ruin. I am a woman who sacrificed 3 years of her life to protect my mother from the truth about her own sister. I am finished protecting anyone from the truth." She looked at Phoebe directly. "You will write a retraction to every person who received your letter about me. You will repay what you owe my mother, and you will never sell anything of mine again." Phoebe opened her mouth, closed it, and looked around the room for an ally. She found none. Lady Ashworth's expression could have frozen the Thames. "I think," Lady Ashworth said, "that Mrs. Cranston should be shown out." In the silence that followed, Lord Thorne took Marin's hand. His fingers were cold. Hers were shaking. Neither of them let go. "That," he said quietly enough that only she could hear, "is the bravest thing I have witnessed in 4 centuries. "I need to sit down," Marin said. "I know." He guided her to a chair with the careful attention of someone handling something precious. "But first, the room is watching, and I would like them to hear this." He did not kneel. He stood beside her, his hand still holding hers, and turned to face the assembled guests. "Miss Hale has honored me with her trust and her company these past weeks. I intend to deserve both for as long as she will allow. If anyone in this room has further questions about her character, they may address them to me." Marin looked up at him. "That was not subtle." "I have never been subtle. Ask Mrs. Calloway." From the doorway where she had arrived by some mysterious housekeeper's instinct, Mrs. Calloway said, "He truly has not. It is his worst quality and occasionally his best." Bessie, who had settled into a chair with a cup of tea and the satisfied expression of a woman who has watched justice served, raised her cup. To the truth, she said, and to women who are smarter than the people trying to silence them. The choice came later, in the quiet, 3 months after the salon. Phoebe had written her retractions. Marin's position at the shop was restored and then surpassed. Mrs. Hathaway, grateful and guilty in equal measure, had promoted her to head seamstress. Dorothea Hale, confronted at last with the full accounting of her sister's predation, had wept and then slowly begun to rebuild something that resembled honesty between herself and her daughter. Marin sat in the library. Her library now, in practice, if not in name, mending a tear in a coat that had belonged to Lord Thorne for, he said, only about 70 years. The fabric smelled of cedar and time. You will outlive me, she said, not looking up from her needle. Yes. He did not pretend otherwise. He never pretended with her. By how long? Centuries. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. She sewed 3 stitches in silence. Precise, even. There is another option, she said. There is. Tell me the what, he told her. The leaving behind not just mortality, but the rhythms that defined a human life. The meals she would no longer taste the same way. The sunlight she would need to manage carefully. The friends she would watch age while she did not. Her mother, whom she would eventually have to leave or explain. My mother sold my gown, Marin said. I have already practiced losing things. This is not a gown. No, she set down the needle. It is a choice, my choice. You said you would not take that from me. He was quiet so long that the fire burned down to embers and the room filled with the smell of cooling ash. Then he said, no, I will not take it from you. Then I choose you, Marin said. I choose this library and this life and whatever strange, cold, eternal thing we become together. Not because I am running from what I lost, because I have finally found something worth staying for. He crossed the room. Not with supernatural speed, slowly, humanly, so she could see every step. He took her face in his hands like wet stone, and she felt the warmth of her own skin reflected back to her from his palms. I have waited 400 years, he said, to hear someone say that. She kissed him. Once. The room was warm and the rain was gentle, and somewhere in the house, Mrs. Calloway was muttering about the fire needing tending. 6 months later, on a Tuesday in October, Marin sat at the kitchen table in Thorne House with a bolt of midnight blue fabric spread before her, cutting a pattern for a gown she was making for Bessie Flint's 54th birthday celebration. The kitchen smelled of rosemary from the garden she had planted, even though she no longer needed to eat what grew in it. She planted things because she liked the smell of earth on her hands. Some pleasures, she had discovered, do not require a pulse. Lord Thorne, Edmund she called him now, though Mrs. Calloway refused to, leaned in the doorway with a cup of tea he had made for Bessie, who was due any moment. He had learned to work the kitchen stove after only 3 attempts, and one small fire that he still maintained was the stove's fault. You are cutting that crooked, he said. I am cutting it perfectly. You are watching at an angle. I have been watching you for 5.5 years. I know you're cutting. Then you know it is never crooked. She did not look up, but she smiled, and the smile had a quality it had not possessed a year ago. Something unhurried, something that expected to have time. Bessie arrived with the force of a small weather event, stamping mud from her boots and handing Mrs. Calloway a jar of pickled onions she had made herself. For the household, she said, though I suspect only I will eat them, given the dietary situation. We do not discuss the dietary situation in the kitchen, Mrs. Calloway said, accepting the onions with the gravity of a diplomatic exchange. We discuss it everywhere else, Bessie said. She sat at the table across from Marin and watched her cut. You look well, annoyingly well. It is October and you look like June. Clean living, Marin said. Bessie glanced at Edmund in the doorway. And how is the undead lord of the manor? Making tea, Edmund said, apparently inadequately. You put the milk in first again, Mrs. Calloway said from the pantry. 4 centuries and he cannot learn the milk goes second. Marin laughed. The sound filled the kitchen and settled into the walls, which were old enough to have absorbed centuries of silence, and seemed grateful for the interruption. Edmund watched her, the way he always watched her when she was not looking, as though she were the answer to something he had long since stopped hoping to solve. She looked up and caught him at it. "Come here," she said. "Hold this edge. My hands are full." He crossed the kitchen and took the fabric where she indicated, his cold fingers brushing her warm ones. They had learned this, the temperature between them, neither warm nor cold, something entirely their own. "Edmund," she said, pinning the last corner. "Yes?" "The milk goes second." He laughed as though, the low, startled kind, the kind that escapes before permission is granted, the kind she had spent 6 months teaching him to allow. And the kitchen, full of rosemary and pickled onions, and the particular warmth of people who have chosen each other with their eyes wide open, held them all inside it like something precious that had no intention of letting go.